Hello dear students, I'm an English teacher, Арал Мабзалқызы. Today we are going to talk about types of translation. The aims of the lesson: to identify the definition of the translation and to classify the translation into different types, to develop students' speaking, reading, listening, and writing skills, to bring up the interest in the study of the culture and the language. Here you can see the plan of the lesson. It is often thought that when given a text, the translator's task is to translate it from beginning to end. But it is not always the case. In fact, as we can see, what the translator often has to do is not always at his own will, but on the order of the employer, person, or institution who needs the text to be translated. In this chapter, we will identify the different kinds of translation as suggested by Комиссаров, Catword, Larson, and Newmark. Комиссаров suggests two classifications: communicative function of the text and a form of speech. According to communicative function of the text, he suggested two kinds of translation: literary translation, and it deals with literary texts, and informative translation. It is rendering into target language non-literary texts. And according to form of speech, he divided into two: written translation and oral translation. So, as we know, written translation, the source text in the written form, and oral translation, it is also divided into two: consecutive translation and simultaneous translation. Okay, now let's see what is consecutive translation and what is simultaneous translation.
The words almost define themselves. Simultaneous means at the same time. The interpreter speaks at the same time as the speaker. Consecutive means one after the other. One speaker says something, maybe a sentence or two, then is silent. The interpreter then renders that much in another language. Then the speaker says something else, waits, the interpreter renders that, and so on. The interpreter will choose the appropriate method for the situation, but it's a good idea for judges and court personnel to understand when each method is being used.
So next is Catword's translations. In his book, A Linguistic Theory and Translation, Catword discusses a number of kinds of translation like full, partial, total, restricted, phonological, graphological, transliteration, rank-bound, and bounded. So now, what is full translation? It is translation in which the entire text is submitted to the translation process. And what is partial translation? It is translation in which some part or parts of the source language text are left untranslated. So, total translation is translation in which all levels of source language text are replaced by target language material. Restricted translation refers to the replacement of source language textual material by equivalent target language textual material. So also here you can see other kinds of translation: phonological translation, graphological translation, transliteration, rank-bound translation, unbounded translation. Unlike Catword, Newmark looks at kinds of translation from the point of view of the reader. He makes a distinction between semantic and a communicative translation. We can summarize the main differences between communicative and semantic translation as suggested by Newmark. So, communicative translation is reader-oriented and the semantic translation is author-oriented. Larson in 1984 divided translation into two main kinds, literal translation and idiomatic. According to Larson, literal translation is form-based, while idiomatic translation is meaning-based. To sum up, translation is a complex process. And Jeremy said that two things are necessary for a good translation: an adequate understanding of the original language and an adequate command of the language into which one is translating. So now, dear students, can you guess what kind of translation is it?
Echándonos unos tragos, fumando, usted sabe, haciendo cosas que no deberíamos estar haciendo en realidad. Estábamos sentados allá atrás comiendo plátanos y otras bobadas.
We were sitting there, we were drinking, we were smoking, we were doing things that we weren't supposed to be doing. We were sitting back there having plantains and other stuff.
Would you please be specific? Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen what you were smoking?
Entre en detalle, por favor. Dígale a las señoras y señores qué es lo que estaba fumando.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything that you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Do you understand that?
Sí. Yes.
You also have the right to counsel. If you're unable to afford counsel, this court will appoint counsel to represent you. Are you able to afford an attorney?
No. No.
Do you wish me to appoint counsel to represent you?
Sí. Yes.
And toward that end, have you filled out this financial affidavit?
Sí. Yes.
Can I be satisfied that the information here is true and correct?
Sí. Yes.
Raise your right hand.
Levante la mano derecha.
Do you solemnly swear that the information on this financial affidavit is true, correct, and complete, so help you God?
Sí, lo juro. Yes, I do.
Here is given some questions. Try to answer.